I've been hearing a certain phrase thrown around quite a lot recently: modern literature is inferior to classics. And another one concerning art: contemporary art will always be worse than Van Gogh or Rembrandt, and insert other famous and great artists. And I am someone who loves reading and I love going to art galleries. And so this is a subject that I really want to talk about today. I thought that first we start with art and then we talk about literature, but please watch the video in full because some of these ideas link back together. Art, literature, music, fashion. All of these creative disciplines are always in motion. They perpetually continue to change, to develop. As we explore new technologies, make discoveries, evolve as a society, we see how the norms and values alter, and how our creations transform too, to reflect this constant amendment, modification, to adjust to these new generations of people who see this art. The creative work adapts and revises itself. In the past, Rembrandt marveled at the way that color and paint, the way that they put together, could make something so realistic, like the glossy sheen of a new fruit or the inside of a beef, something that would seem so realistic that you couldn't distinguish it from reality, something that was created from his artistic work. That was how people represented things back then. Art is a painting or maybe a sculpture made out of stone or clay, other natural materials. Now to show meat, you could make it out of recycled plastics, make it into beads, hang it up like sculptures. The first plastics originated around the 20th century as our understanding of science evolved. But even if Rembrandt had the plastic, I don't think he would have created anything like the beads that I showed you, because it was a different time. Even if he had the material, the values were different, the society was different, and he would have simply not considered this art. I mean, we can't even decide what art is now. This is a topic that we've been having debates on for centuries. And if we can't decide on it now, how do you expect the 17th century to have it figured out? I mean, 17th century society, mostly religious, mostly God-fearing, quite literally art was within the frames. Art for me is not just something that is visually pleasing, that is there for our enjoyment, for our entertainment of the senses, for the aesthetics. Art is, for me, a language, a way that we communicate, a way that we have shared values. And sure, everyone finds different meanings in the art that we view, but the original, the foundation, what the artist created, even though the idea was different, the foundation is the same, because we all see the giant skull that Damien Hirst put there, right? We all see it. I'm not the only one. And so art, because it can be a way of communicating what the artist is saying, art can very much serve a purpose, like be propaganda, like in the wars, or I don't know, be a political critique, a political commentary. The work that we create as humans is dependent on our values and the way that we were nurtured. Humans are very much a product of nurture as well as nature. A teenager now is different from a teenager in the 19th century. The values are different and the art that we create would be different too. And because our views differ, art itself modifies, it transforms based on who is making it. That is why Rembrandt couldn't have worked with plastics in this way. Not because he didn't have plastics, but because he would have seen it as fundamentally different than what we see it like now. And so for me, seeing contemporary art is seeing the 21st century alive. We see something that accurately reflects our reality. And it's seeing an alternative view. It's seeing something that you don't necessarily see in the same way, but you live in a shared reality. And so seeing this art is like engaging in a sort of dialogue with the artist. It's talking to someone who is living in the same world as you, but sees it in a fundamentally different way. So seeing this art is always interesting. It also gives me a feeling of being very much alive and being very much aware that I'm living right now in the present, and there are many other people alive around me, and they all have their own feelings, their own emotions, and their own perspectives. This is why I like contemporary art, because it's not so simple as seeing a swing and recognizing a shared childhood experience. It's seeing something in the now and recognizing that you're present and you're alive and you're in the 21st century, and all of these emotions that you're feeling are relevant and other people are relevant too. It's a sort of engaging on a deeper level. And of course, 20th century art that concerns things like anguish and love and despair, universal human emotions, is still relevant. Of course, you can still engage with meaningful conversations about it. You can unfold through the layers and you can feel that you're talking directly through the artist and you feel seen. The reason that I'm saying this is not to bash like art that is not contemporary. On the contrary, it's to say that the dialogue that you have with you and the painting, it can be meaningful and relevant even in the present. It doesn't have to be something that was done in the past. A difference is, however, that when we view pieces that are not contemporary, we view them through our modern day lens. We impose our values, we impose our beliefs onto them. And so it's a whole different sort of dialogue. But my main point is that it is still a dialogue. So when people say that contemporary art is worse because we cannot engage in a meaningful conversation with it, I find myself disagreeing. Of course, it's a different age, what was before now, and of course, it's a different conversation. But my question to you is why you think that that conversation is better than the conversation we have at present? Is it the medium? Is it something else? Is it the feeling of nostalgia? And I agree, certain pieces can be better. I would choose Caravaggio over Hearst any day. But the point is not that certain pieces can be better, because of course we engage with different pieces differently. Some are more meaningful than others. My question is why, if by choosing more works from one time era, we generalize and we say that all contemporary art is terrible just because we disagree, just because we don't see the point. And so we shouldn't disregard contemporary art because, like it or not, we're here. We're part of this present conversation. We all saw COVID, we all saw the wildfires, we all saw the geopolitical situations. And now our art lives with them because, like it or not, they are consciously or subconsciously in our shared memory. So do you argue the superiority of non-contemporary art because you prefer the dialogue to modern art, because you want to feel far away from the pain of a lost loved one or from seeing the massive amount of deforestation going on? Do you think that times were simpler back then, that times were easier? Do you feel a sense of nostalgia for a time that you weren't born in? Like, it's far away from all this mess that we find ourselves in. And our memory of history, unless it's like a proper study of history, we seem to romanticize things. Like, for us, the 90s aren't a time of like economic instability or general worries in different countries. For us, the 90s are seeing someone with curly hair and with bright makeup and what seems like constant partying and fun. So we seem to only remember the good. And there's a trend going on now that this phrase, I was born in the wrong generation. And it's this feeling that if I was born back then, I wouldn't have the same problems as I do now. And of course that's true, but just because you don't have the same problems doesn't mean you don't have problems in general. Would you rather you were fighting in the wars, or would you rather you were working in a factory? Every generation has its problems. And I think that we shouldn't just embrace art that's not contemporary because it shows a different reality. Because it was in the past, because it seemed to be a different sort of problem, it's somehow better. It's not. It's the experience that we assign to it, it's the values that we see it through that make us say this is better or this is better. There's also another opinion that I'd like to address here. People often say that they hate contemporary art because it's all over the place. It's not a painting, it's not a sculpture, it's a piece of string, or it's a giant statue of a metal dog. And it's highly conceptual and it's not always easy to understand, but simpler doesn't always mean better. We all engage with art differently, like I said before, so a piece that is meaningful to me can be just a piece of string to somebody else, or likewise a piece that means the world to someone else, it's just a photograph to me. And so I think that we should remember that this is just not the way that things should be done is not really a justification, because long ago pop art was a challenge. It was a challenge to norms, it was a challenge to the way that things were done, and now there are so many people who love it and who embrace it, and without it, where would we be with this new art that we have now? Because art is very much a product of its predecessors too. Like when we had Impressionism, for example, people didn't want to accept the Impressionists into their salons because you shouldn't be painting water lilies. I mean, you should be painting what people were painting before, heroes. There's a tendency to glorify our predecessors, and like we glorify our predecessors now, I think that someday people will glorify us because we're the predecessors to a future. Our present is somebody else's history. We shouldn't just blindly be encouraging people to go back to the ways of the painting, because everything that we have now is a result of innovation and a result of change, and of people saying, I don't want to live like this, or of people saying, let's try new things. We wouldn't have domesticated animals if someone didn't decide, oh, this is more convenient, we should do this. Likewise, we wouldn't have the art that we have now. And so I think that instead of asking why people are coloring outside of the lines and urging them to stay inside the lines, we should be asking, what happens if everybody colors outside the lines? What happens if this innovation brings so much change? Just because something is new or something is different or something is not necessarily what we're used to doesn't mean it's worse. And I think that we should make a habit of genuinely engaging with something that we find hard to understand, something that we haven't seen before. And if we genuinely engage with it, everyone grows as a person because we push our own limits and then we collaborate on it and we add something new to it, and then somebody else adds something new to it because they haven't seen it before, and they start asking questions. And we encourage this attitude in learning and in education. Well, at least we should. This attitude towards innovation, towards change, towards asking questions, towards embracing what you don't know. This pursuit for knowledge, this pursuit to try and understand what you didn't understand before, because we're not just born with some starting sense of knowledge. We acquire it as we move on to the world. And so if we talk about this, when we talk about education and when we talk about cultural difference, I think that we should also talk about it when we talk about art, to embrace what we don't understand and to try and learn from the people who make it, to see how it was different from the generations before us, and to ask ourselves, why is it different? What sort of events have impacted our creativity? And to conclude, I want to recap some of my main points because I know I've been talking for a while. 1. Contemporary art can be just as relevant, meaningful, and engaging. 2. Just because contemporary art is different doesn't mean it's worse. 3. Simplicity is not always better. If you don't understand a work, that doesn't mean it's a bad work. Maybe you just fundamentally disagree, or maybe you don't have the same experience and knowledge. That doesn't make you or the work bad. It's just a difference in opinion. 4. The past is not better than the present, and so the products of the past don't necessarily mean they're better than the products of the present. One day, our present will be someone else's past. However, all that being said, I just want to state one more time that I am not discouraging you from viewing other types of art, or if you genuinely don't like contemporary art, that's okay too. I just want to urge you to see the good and the bad in every movement, and to genuinely try and see that you give it an actual try rather than just dismissing it straight away. I welcome you to the literature section of this video, and I wanted to say that in case you just skipped straight through here because you're just a regular reader and you like my normal book content, could you please watch the art section first too, because I think that there are a lot of points there that apply to literature as well. But for example, the points about simplicity that are made there. And when I talk about literature, first I actually wanted to talk about why people read classics. Reason number 1, classics are part of a certain cultural code, and a lot of books reference them. So without reading the original text, it's hard to understand the allusions in modern day works. Take for example Ulysses, a classic that references back an even further classic, the Odyssey. If you only read what you have to read for class and your teacher decided to study Ulysses, which would be a very harsh decision from your teacher, you would find yourself in a really difficult situation, because the finer bits of the novel would be somewhat lost. 2. Classics are linguistically different. People don't write now like they used to before. The sentences used to be far wordier. 3. Possibly the main reason is that classics are classics for a reason. They're books that are important in that they shaped history, and they shaped the people who read them. Take Charles Dickens's work, for example. I talked about the influence of A Christmas Carol in my Christmas reading video. More than that, classics have a huge fan base, so often the case is that people love the books, and so they become classics. 4. Classics can often broaden our awareness and increase our empathy because we're reading about something we never experienced. Art is just a snapshot, whereas literature can be a whole life in itself. Those are just some of the reasons that people read classics. Of course, these are not all the reasons, and I definitely urge you to share your reasons in the comments. But just to stress one more time, because this is so important, this video is not hating on classics or anything traditional that's not contemporary. No, it's just urging you to push yourself outside of your comfort zone and to try new things. So if you only read classics, I want to address some of of the points that perhaps you make to yourself internally and to persuade you to give modern literature a try too, because who knows, maybe you'll find a book that you really love, a book that will change your life. A little pretentious, people say quite a lot, is that classics, if you read classics, you're just a deeper person, you're more intelligent, you don't read contemporary literature. Like, if you read contemporary literature, you just have a terrible attention span. And to that, I just want to ask, what is deep to you? Because deep is quite a difficult point to define. And to say that somebody else is a lesser reader just because they read less deep stuff, is deep just the opposite of shallow? Well, for me, a shallow book is probably a book that decides to touch on all the subjects, and then once it touches on all the subjects, it claims that it has touched upon them with great depth, that it has suggested something revolutionary, some new ideas, rather than just admitting to itself that it just included those subjects because it wanted to, or because it thought it would make it more meaningful to people. I mean, obviously that's a simplistic definition, but if we're sticking to calling a book shallow just because it touches on a lot of different subjects and not in a lot of great depth, for sure modern literature is very saturated. It needs to meet the demands, it needs to have those plot twists and like other things, because sometimes certain audiences won't read them. And okay, I don't think that every book should pursue that, because I mean, not every audience is for that one specific book. But classics often have that too. Classics often touch on a lot of subjects too. So I don't think it's that. I think it's the definition of deep for you. And I genuinely think that you should just persevere and attempt to find a book that will revolutionize the way you think, whether it's classic or whether it's contemporary. Because maybe it's this idea that when classics wrote certain ideas, they were still like fresh and original, but now we've seen those ideas before, so everything seems recycled, a variation of one upon another. And sure, maybe that's a valid reason, so maybe you turn to classics to teach you. But I do think that all books have something to teach you. If you come away from a book learning something small, something that seems insignificant, you have still learned something. And I'm not talking about non-fiction books, I'm talking about fiction books too. Fiction books can teach you things that you just wouldn't be able to find anywhere else. And of course, classics can teach you something that's always valuable, like compassion. But classics were written during a different age. So I think that we shouldn't just be learning from classics alone. We should obviously supplement that learning with modern content too, because it's a different way of dealing with the sense of interconnectedness. People didn't have those same issues as we do right now with surveillance capitalism. Of course, people predicted them. Books like 1984 and We, but for them it was a prediction, and for us, some of what they predicted is a reality. So if you supplement your learning and some of your theories and some of your ideas with modern content, you'll have a fuller picture of the world as it is now. If you read classics solely to understand the modern day cultural code, to see the allusions to a certain work in film or fashion or, I don't know, music, then firstly, I think that you're missing out, because we should be reading classics for the enjoyment, absolutely, for the compassion, for the learning new things, not just for seeing a cultural code, seeing the original base. You could gain the cultural code from other things too. And of course, history plays an important part, and history is everywhere around us. We see traces of it, we see remains of it, we see some of it in our present. For example, books like Bulgakov's Master and Margarita can show us why certain aspects of Russia are the way they are, or what life was like in the Soviet Union. But culture changes, culture constantly changes, and sometimes the works that were part of the cultural code and are still part of it now just don't accurately reflect the reality. For example, you could read a book that was written in the Soviet Union to see why Russian pensioners are stockpiling things like sugar or buying only Russian chocolate, and you would understand that. But it's only if you read a more recent book or a more modern book that talks about history that you would understand why this gap between the young and the old keeps widening. Another argument that people make for the superiority of classics is that they're linguistically better, that the language is harder, that there's metaphors, the sentence structure is different, and of course I can't argue with that, because truly the language was more formal, and we don't speak the way that we do back then. Our language is overtaken by shortened words, by acronyms, by desire to just get it all out and move on. There's not this sort of thirst for the beauty of language. However, I would say that it's not only in classics that you can find language that challenges yourself. Luminaries, it's a modern book, and it talks about the gold rush. And it's honestly one of the densest and hardest books that I have ever read, because the vocabulary that it uses is just so specific and it's clearly well researched. And even though it's written in the present and you would think, oh, it can't like reflect what the past was like, it really does, because the writing is there. But what I wanted to say was that it's not only the language, it can be the subject matter, or it can be just the general plot, the way that the book is made, the way that the book is like put together. For example, House of Leaves, that's a bit more modern. It was written in the 2000s, and it's a plot about a man going insane. And so as he goes insane over the course of the novel, first of all, it's really hard because you're mentally there watching him go insane. You feel yourself getting insane too, losing control of reality. Things become incoherent, and it becomes really hard to make sense of the narrative. If you hate all contemporary books, maybe you just haven't found a good book yet. Maybe you're just still in search of a new favorite. And that last point is the critical point I want to end this video on. Maybe you just haven't found the right book yet. And I try to approach everything I do in life with that philosophy, that maybe, just maybe, I haven't given it enough of a chance yet. That maybe I just need to push a little harder, to not just dismiss something at first glance, to actually make an effort to understand things better. I used to hate classics. I really did. I couldn't read them. I found all of them boring, and that all started with Pride and Prejudice, which I absolutely hated, and I still hate Pride and Prejudice to this day. However, I genuinely love classics now, and the more I read, the more I fall in love with it. And sometimes it's just something that you need to really taste. The taste only comes in a little bit later when you've had a few bites. And I just want to say that sometimes this goes too far. Don't waste your life trying to force yourself into liking things just because you think you should. You think that you should try and understand contemporary art, so you force yourself to look at it even if you don't like it, or you force yourself to read classics because you think it'll make you see more intelligence. Like, don't do it. Life is too short to waste on doing stuff that you absolutely hate, that you don't want to do just for appearances. But like, talk to yourself and ask yourself if you've genuinely given it a try, if you've attempted to engage with the subject meaningfully. It urges you to have that mentality where you're always learning, where you're always trying new things, where you just don't age. You never become fully stagnant. But it also urges you to persevere, and you never know, maybe you'll find a true passion. And I know today's section on literature was a little bit shorter, but that is because I'm currently working on another video right now to deal with literature, and I didn't want to just overdo it here. But I hope you enjoyed it. Please stick around for maybe that video or maybe for other videos, and I hope that even if you ultimately disagree with my points, like you think that ultimately classics are superior or contemporary art sucks, I just hope that from this video you take away one message, and that's to go out and to try new things. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll hopefully see you around.